lot of our members have listened to the podcast. They know that you have a spectacular background from NASA to Target, Apple. But Chase, I'll hand the mic off to you. As more people trickle in, we'll start the presentation.
Yeah, I appreciate that intro. Yeah, I mean, my background is physics and math is kind of, what I got my degree in. I grew up in South Louisiana, went to LSU, actually tutored a lot of football players on the football team, which was kind of cool. Some of those went off, went on to go to the NFL. But anyway, after LSU, I went and I was going to get my PhD in quantum computing. So I was in the University of Maryland system for a hot second. I think I only made it a year into my PhD when I realized, yeah, this isn't really for me. I don't really want to get a PhD. So what do I do? So I started looking around, and I got this job opportunity at NASA. Actually, by touring NASA, I went on a tour randomly, and then there was a friend who worked there who brought me to their lab, and started chatting with one of the engineers, and they were showing me around and showing me what things are, and I was kind of like interacting and responding. And then he starts asking me questions. He's like, I was asking him questions. He liked my questions, and then he starts asking me like, what is this? What do you think this is? And I'm like, I think that's a mass spectrometer. Okay, what kind of mass spectrometer? Well, it looks like it might be a quadrupole mass spectrometer, like stuff like that. He liked my answers. He starts asking me like, oh, what is this thing? What is this thing? What do you know about this? Have you ever used these before? And at the end, he's like, yep, you're gonna do really great here. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, like if you apply, you basically pass the interview already. You can just apply and we'll get you a job at NASA. And I was like, you mean after my PhD is done? And he's like, no, screw your PhD, just do it now. So that was how I got my job at NASA, and was a systems engineer. I worked there for a few years. Then I worked in defense for a few years. I worked in the startup industry for a few years after that at a startup called Deliv. Deliv was acquired by Target. Worked at Target for 2 years, built the infrastructure for Target's same day, next day delivery program. So we scaled from like 0 to something like 1 million deliveries per day in something like 2 years. Then I got into Y Combinator. And yeah, the startup that I got into Y Combinator for failed. We had a co-founder split. That was a whole experience. And I mean, this thing happens a lot. Like, essentially, when startups fail, everyone thinks it's because you run out of money or whatever. But no, a lot of startups fail because startup founders run out of motivation, or because of like the startup founders don't get along. It's actually really important to be good friends if you're going to start a company with someone. And then I started a new company with my current co-founder, Ryan Brandt, and our new company is Chat Open Source, and we offer something like ChatGPT, but with open source models, more private and secure. And we're working with these mega law firms now. And yeah, that's my background. That's where I'm at today.
Fantastic, Chase. Thanks for that. And I think it really kind of gives us a good segue into your experience into Y Combinator. And I will go ahead and start this presentation. It's interactive again. So ladies and gentlemen, if you guys can scan the QR code, it'll make the presentation a lot more fun and engaging. But I'll start it.
We'll also have the link in the chat too. If you ever want to join, once the presentation starts, you can go to menti.com. That little header up top will always stay there. So you could join anytime. We'll see the fun results, and yeah, we'll kick it off. So Taggart, got it.
Hey Chase,
Awesome.
I have to say, your story, although kind of similar to the modern day Goodwill Hunting, you're sort of like walking around, you answer some questions and go, this guy's a genius, we want to hire this guy. It's a great story. I will not interrupt again.
I never saw the movie, but isn't the premise something like some janitor or something?
Yeah, he's a janitor who sees the math equation for the high end and just sort of answers it, and nobody in class can answer it, and they try and figure out who answered it, and eventually they track him down, and like, you know, he's like the genius janitor kind of thing. Obviously, you're not a janitor, but it's a great story. Walking around NASA, and they're like, you're hired.
Well, I'm not a janitor. I'm also not a genius. So, you know, I don't know what exactly applies. But actually, I was a janitor. That was my first job, actually, was as a janitor. And I worked for my grandparents' janitorial service. Yeah, the Genie's janitorial service. It's the maiden name of my grandma is Jean. And so, yeah, like she basically her and my grandfather basically raised me, and I must have been 12 years old, 13 years old when I started out as a janitor with them. So I don't know, maybe it does apply a little bit, I guess.
Fantastic. Well, the first thing that we want to start off in this presentation is, I know some of you are probably unaware of what Y Combinator is. It's the biggest accelerator in the world, probably the most notable as well. But Chase, why do you think startups apply to YC? Why pick YC as the accelerator?
I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I hate to turn this into like a promotional piece for Y Combinator, but honestly, I love Y Combinator. And I think the reason is not as obvious as what most people would think. You know, most people think it's got to be because of the money, or it's got to be because of the prestige, or it's got to be because of this or because of that. But I really think the main benefit of doing YC, especially for first-time founders, is you instantly get a community. I mean, you get plugged into some of the most ambitious people, young people in the world, right? I mean, I must have, you know, 100 friends and acquaintances from YC just from that, you know, short few month period. And you very quickly are surrounded by people who have very high standards. YC has very strict standards about, you know, not letting in people who, I don't know, are for lack of a better word, like braggadocious or hard to work with, or, you know, whatever. Like these are people that are very high integrity people. When I meet someone from YC, it's typically extremely high integrity, and it means something. I mean, you know, you meet someone and they're from YC, and you think instantly like, oh, they must be, you know, pretty high quality. A lot of the people in the program are from like Stanford and MIT, which is very intimidating. I got to be honest. I went through the program and I was not from those places. You know, coming from LSU, I was like, oh man, I'm the odd person out. But you know, it's something that pushes you. It's the community that really is the benefit, I think, of going through YC. You know.
Fantastic. And this is kind of an interactive kind of word cloud for the audience, but with Chase explaining why YC, I'm actually curious, the audience, what are the most important traits for a startup founder? And so if you look at your phone, you can start putting in specific responses. We see vision, resilience, grit.
Yeah. Those are important.
And I would ask you too, Chase, as we get some more answers here, being, you know, maybe I'm not sure if you've gone through other accelerators or from what you've seen at Techstars or 500 Startups or other ones, was there a reason why, you know, you were interested more in YC over the others, or was it just more like, obviously that's kind of best top of the precipice, so you know, why YC over anything else?
I mean, I am less familiar with Techstars because I'm not in it. My co-founder went through Techstars for his previous startup, actually, so he would be able to speak more to that. But the reason why I picked YC, I mean, I guess it was, I had met a few founders that were very high integrity, very obviously good people, and also very high quality, that were Y Combinator founders. And I was like, man, if it, you know, if they're in this program, then I want to try to be in this program too. And so that was kind of why, you know, I tried to join. And when I applied, I mean, we applied with basically nothing. And we go into the interview, and I think it was like the third round interview, which if you know anything about like YC interviews, which we didn't at the time, they don't usually go to a third round. So it was kind of obvious like something was about to happen here. And I remember them being like, yeah, well, we hate your startup idea, but we love you guys. So if you're willing to pivot, then you're in, like, yeah, I'll fund you guys, And we were like, holy moly. And yeah, I mean, I picked it because of the high integrity of the people that I had met previously that were in YC. And I think integrity is a really important aspect of being a founder. I think that's often overlooked because, I mean, it's a 10-year journey, right? It's like a 1% shot at being a billionaire and 99% shot at not being a billionaire. The 10-year journey for that 1% shot, and over that period, you're really going to be tested. You have to have a lot of grit, a lot of determination, and a lot of, sticking it out, and kind of like putting one foot in front of the other and saying like, okay, everything's falling apart around me, but what do I do next? And I think those are really, really important traits. And I think having high integrity is extremely, extremely important. I mean, if you're not high integrity, there are opportunities to do really bad things, unfortunately. I mean, with a startup, you could, if you wanted to, you could lie to investors, or you could lie to customers, or you could make promises that you don't deliver on, or you could do these terrible things that will get you ahead in the short term, but in the long term, they never work out. It never works out, and that always leads to failure. So I would say integrity is incredibly important for founders to have.
Yeah, fantastic. And we see grit, leadership, and vision, I think, is another one that you didn't really mention, but do you think vision is also one of the most important things an entrepreneur can have? Because when you think of like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, all these amazing folks, they're known as visionaries, right? So you can...
I think it's an interesting point. I think it's very hard to get people excited to work basically for free, because startups, when they start out, they have no money, right? Basically with very little hope, right? When you start a startup, you typically start with no customers, right? Mm-hmm. It's very hard for people to work in that kind of environment if you don't have a big vision, right? It's almost, I would say it's harder to build a smaller company and it's easier to build a bigger company. If you have a big vision and you're like, we're going to change the world in 10 years, it's a lot easier to get people on board for that sort of journey and go through all the pain and the suffering and have it be worth something at the end, than it is to tell them like, look, we're going to make, all this money in a year by like running this cryptocurrency, whatever that's gonna like, do this fractional trading thing. I don't know, whatever it is that you can make money that way. But if you want people to follow you in a startup, you do have to have kind of a big vision and a big picture and a big plan for changing the world, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that being said, we know the traits to be a leader in Y Combinator. But how many startups do you guys think apply to Y Combinator every single year?
And then I think YC has a couple batches, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, there's like a spring and a winter batch. And so the question here is just across all batches, how many total people apply, or how many, companies apply? So I've got a few more answers floating in.
It's 44,000.
What do we got? Let's see. This was from the 2023 YC numbers. So let's see what they have.
Yeah. All right. So, oops. The correct answer is 20,000. I don't know why it's not showing it. The correct answer is 20,000. 20,000 startups apply per year at YC, which is an incredible number. And out of that, I believe only 20 startups get accepted per batch. So
and that was actually from, so the 2023 batch, so to Alan's point, so it's 20,000 for the winter batch, and then it was 12 or 20,000 for the spring as well. So for last year, they had 40,000, 20 for the winter alone. So insane numbers to that point, exactly.
But yeah, and then just to kind of go through the process, I know Chase, you kind of brought up the interview process a little bit. You guys made it to the third round of interview, but yeah, we'd like to just learn about, application, interview, the acceptance, and the start, kind of how that whole journey is.
Yeah. So the application part is interesting. I would say YC really responds to signals, right? You don't have revenue, you typically don't have customers, typically don't have traction. So they need to look for proxies. They need to look for these signals that could be attributed with, a potentially successful startup, right? So, I mean, I think it's very well known that, YC does take it very seriously if you have some very impressive background, or if you're the world expert in something extremely niche. If you're, a PhD in machine learning, right? They regard that very highly, right? If you're, an expert in diffusion models, or you invented some new way of making diffusion models more efficient or something, they regard that very highly. If you've had a successful startup in the past, that's a very high signal for them. That's something that, they highly regard. If you've done something very hard that very few people have done, they take that into account. And I mean, if you don't have those things, I think the other thing that you can show in the application process is something like interest from customers, right? We have this many customers lined up, and these are their names, and this is how you can contact them, and they're interested in buying this product if we just build it, and they're interested in paying this much amount of money, right? And they've already given me their credit cards, and I've charged them $100 each or something, for like a tiny little paid pilot. That is something, again, that's a signal that they highly respect and highly regard in YC. So those are kind of the two basic ways. You could either have a background that's extremely impressive to them, or you can have some sort of signal of customer interest, customer traction that is verifiable by them. Ideally both, right?
And just curious, once you kind of show your credibility, what are the kind of questions they ask during the interview process?
Oh man, yeah, the interview process, I mean, that's the next stage, and it is very, very fast. It goes by so quickly. I think YC doesn't recommend that you interview prep, but I have worked with people before and helped them prep for the interview, and I think that has helped them, and vice versa. I mean, I've prepped for the interview before, and I think that helped me. They say, like, don't come off as you just kind of be yourself, right? Don't come off as too canned, right? And I think that's why they don't want you necessarily to prep. But I mean, if you follow the spirit of it, you can interview prep and still, kind of be off the cuff a little bit and be genuine and be, not like, oh, I am reading this from a script and this is my answer to this question. Right? It's very,
and then,
yeah.
And then after, the interview process, I'm assuming they probably ask about, like, I'm sure everyone here have seen Shark Tank, and a lot of the sharks, their biggest metric is like literally the numbers. If they have the percentages, the numbers, the finances, they understand all that. So they ask, in Y Combinator, do they ask you, like, what's your projected tenure, like, or they ask like specific questions like that about the numbers, the statistics, the data?
Sorry, I had to cough. It's interesting. Like, my mom thinks that, like, the startup industry does work like Shark Tank, and I have to explain to her, like, no, this is not how VCs work. Like, we're not on a television show. We're not doing things for shock factor. We're not, Shark Tank is so funny that we're not giving away 40% of our company for 100K from Mark Cuban or something, right? They're very, I would say the questions that they ask are very pointed, right? Something like, why are you going to win over Microsoft's sales team, right? Like if Microsoft has a big sales team and they do this in the near future, how are you going to respond to that, right? And you got to, on the spot, be able to have a good answer from that is from the heart and is genuine and is not some canned response that's like, hey, well, we've thought about that before, and these are the reasons why we think that Microsoft sales team is going to do really good in this regard, and that regard. But for this niche that we're focused on, we think actually we can win for these reasons, right? The questions are extremely intelligent. I would say some of the best questions, that I've ever been asked about a startup. Like they're extremely thoughtful, and they have to be very careful about their time because they do only get a small amount of time with you, right? And it's not because like they're trying to put the pressure on you or anything like that. They're actually trying to get to a yes, right? YC is not trying to get to a no. I mean, they start by looking for any reason why you might succeed, right? And if they can find that reason, they will fund you. It's just that their standards are very high because, I mean, most startups do fail, right? And they tell you this in the batch, right? Most startups in the batch fail. And by fail, I don't mean like, you're homeless, right? You're going to be fine. You're going to be totally fine. You can always get a job. You can always quit your startup. You can always feed your family most likely. But by fail, what they mean is building $1 billion company, right? That's success in their eyes. And ideally a $1 trillion company. They really, YC really wants that. They haven't hit it yet, but there are $1 trillion companies, and I think they will hit it one day.
Right. And you said that it was a pretty fast turnaround. Did they send you like a letter in the mail for your acceptance? They send you an email. How was that like? And then right afterwards, didn't they invest? They invest like 150,000 for 7% equity. How did that all work out?
So the 150,000, they actually updated that deal. So now it's 500,000 for 7%, most favored nations, and pro rata is kind of, so it's not a clean safe, is my understanding. But yeah, I mean, the acceptance for me was very non-standard. They typically will give you a phone call. You'll pick up the phone and it'll be like, YC on the other end, some partner congratulating you and saying, hey, when can you move to Mountain View? Now they're based in SF, so they just got a new office in SF. So when can you move to SF? Right, Gary Tan's a huge believer in moving out of Mountain View and moving more YC events and more of the cohort up to San Francisco, which I think is the right move. I agree with that. And so they'll be like, yeah, when can you start? Like, when can you move up here and get ready and get going, right? Ideally, even before the batch starts, you're still working on your company. Ideally, you've been working on the company before you even applied and put in an application. And then the start is, is exciting. They usually start with a retreat, or at least they did for my batch. I think that's pretty standard for most of their batches. The retreat is great. There's like a orientation meeting. They get you on the Slack channel. They get you set up with Bookface. They tell you like, you need to go through Bookface and start reading all these articles. There's hundreds of articles packed with tons of information, and they say like, you need to skim over this and be able to wrap your head around this very quickly within the next few days. And it's not like required or anything, but it's just the smart thing to do. There's no like test or anything, but I mean, you might as well take advantage of the resources in front of you. So they get you on Bookface. Bookface, sorry, I know I'm saying a lot of words that mean nothing to people. It's like, it's similar to it's like a social media network that was built, I think, by Gary Tan, who's the current president of YC. and essentially it's only for YC founders. And it's where you can see events, and it's very rudimentary. I mean, it's not the product itself that really matters. It's the community that's using the product that's using Bookface that really matters. And so it's very high quality people on there. They're asking questions like, hey, you know, I'm thinking about hiring my first employee. What do you guys think about using this platform or that platform? Or what do you guys use? Or, you know, hey, we've got an event that's happening, you know, next weekend. If you'd like to, you know, if you'd like to hang out with us, then here's the invite. Or, you know, hey, we just launched on Product Hunt or whatever. Like, can you please go and upvote us on Product Hunt, or I don't know, whatever. Yeah, we're doing this launch. Can you give us some feedback? Can you get on our product and use it and try to break it and give us some feedback? Things like that. So, you know, getting Bookface was fun. Getting access to the Slack was great. And then you just go to that retreat. The retreat's at a really nice hotel, or at least it was for my batch. It was like in wine country. And there you get to hang out with the YC partners and talk to them and chat with other YC founders who are your, you know, they're your future friends, maybe your future employees, your future, you know, maybe future co-founders, right? They're your new community, right? And I think that's why I recommend YC above everything else, is that sense of community, that in-personness. I mean, our batch actually, S22 was right after COVID, when COVID was kind of like winding down. We were the first batch that was not remote since COVID hit, right? And I think that made a huge impact on my life. I'm really happy that I didn't go through a remote batch, because I talked to a lot of people who did. And I mean, the start for them was very different than it was for me.
Right. Well, definitely want to have enough time for the audience to ask questions at the end, but to kind of go on to the next part of this, being a first-time founder, what traits and characteristics made Chase stand out, or just in general, what traits and characteristics make someone stand out when they're applying to Y Combinator?
That's good question. So this is kind of like we're trying to build off of that first word cloud we had, where it was, what are the traits as a founder that are important? And then in this case, you know, what makes Chase, or through his journey, or other founders, right, more specific to YC? And I think that just from what we've heard, and would love to hear your thoughts on it too, Chase, it's what you shared in the beginning, right? They were more interested in you as the founding team versus your idea. And I think a lot of times you see founders try to sell, not just in general, right, to investors, to their friends, right, to others. They're trying to sell their idea, like, this is why this idea is so unique. When in reality, right, there are very few truly unique ideas in the world, and it all comes down to execution, right? Are you the right team to execute and bring this to, not even to the $1 billion, billion company, but just to success? So I'd love to kind of hear, you know, was a big percentage of them you think similar, more like, okay, I see why these founders were admitted, versus, oh wow, this is a crazy idea, I never thought about it. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Like, there are no new ideas under the sun, right? I think is, like, you know, a quote that someone said, but it's really a good founding team will find a way to succeed. They will find some sort of way in, or some sort of, they'll get a company to 1 million ARR. If you're a good founding team, you can do that with most ideas. It's just like, can you build a great business out of that, right? And I would say, you know, it's funny, you meet some founders that are first-time founders, and they're like, oh, my idea is worth so much. Your idea is worth nothing. Your execution is everything. And I think the idea becomes a great idea when you're at the right place at the right time. You know, if it's something ideally that couldn't exist before, because, you know, it was invented recently, or because this scaling law happened. And, you know, in our case, we have that situation because open source models just were not competitive with OpenAI until maybe Llama 2, right? You know, like maybe 6 months ago, right? It's hard to, you know, put an exact timeline, but I would say, like, you know, now we've got Mixtral, which is even better than Llama 2. Llama 3 is probably going to drop from Meta, you know, who knows, within the next couple of months, and that might be an improvement over Mixtral. But open source wasn't really possible until something like 6 months ago, which is an ideal situation, because if you're the right founder at the right time when a new technology is possible, right? That's what makes an idea great. It's not like, oh man, I'm such a genius. It's like it's much more organic than that,
Fantastic. And as you can see, a lot of these folks put in the traits that that brought you in. So integrity, humble, credentials, resilience, communication. I think, Chase, you're a fantastic communicator, and I think that's one of the best assets for an entrepreneur. But we'll go on to the next slide. I really appreciate everybody for putting these fantastic words in for Chase.
Thank you.
But what in general, and I know we've already talked about this, but what in general will make a founder stand out?
That's a good question. I mean, I think founders stand out by not giving up. And what I mean by not giving up isn't necessarily like, I've got this idea and I'll never give up, right? I'm building, every founder starts by wanting to solve their own problems. And if you're some sort of college student, right? Maybe your problem is, my mom used to do my laundry and now I need to do my laundry. Let's build a startup that does your laundry, right? Like these are like quintessential, like first time founder ideas. Everyone starts like that. I mean, I started like that. And then you grow and you develop and you learn like, okay, it actually really matters what customers want who are able to pay. Maybe poor college students are not a great audience. Maybe a laundry service a startup does not make, right? Like maybe that's not a great startup. If these people don't have money to pay you, like how are you supposed to make money? And so you start to learn these lessons and you become resilient, right? And you become resilient, I think, also to no's, because I mean, yes, YC did have me in their batch, sure, but like, do you know how many no's I've gotten? Like way more than the yeses that I've gotten. When you talk to customers, they're going to tell you no all the time, and you gotta let it just, you can't let it get to you, right? You have to keep being resilient and keep learning and iterating. It's not enough just to be resilient, though. You also need to grow and iterate, right? So why are they saying no, right? And learning and okay, the first startup didn't work out very well. Why didn't it work out? Okay, let's learn from that and let's not make that mistake again. So I think that's what makes founders.
And just like another question that kind of came to mind, I think, you're a first-time founder. How do you prepare for being an entrepreneur, for those entrepreneurial endeavors? I feel like it's so hard to be a founder unless you start doing it and you start understanding it. But how did you kind of, before you became an entrepreneur, how were you able to prepare for that?
That's a really interesting question. I think there's kind of two schools of thought, and I don't think either is better than the other, but I know which direction I went. For me, I didn't really have, to be honest, the self-confidence to just jump in as a startup founder in Louisiana. In Louisiana, there are hardly any startup founders. You tell people you're starting a startup and they think that you're going to go on Shark Tank, right? And this is kind of, they don't know anything about VCs, or you don't meet any other YC founders. So you don't think it's possible, right? Growing up in Louisiana. So what I did instead was I built up my confidence by going and doing things, right? If you spend a long time going and doing things, being an engineer, working in software, working on infrastructure, making tools and, moving up in your career, having interesting experiences, like seeing what it's like working for the government, seeing what it's like working for a startup, seeing what it's like working at a big corp like Target, right? You can kind of get a lay of the land and build that understanding of the real world that I think a lot of young founders don't necessarily have. And that, I think, is a valid way to start your journey, is just go out and do stuff that's interesting and take 5 years, 10 years to do it. The more efficient path is, you know, the other school of thought is just, you know, you're 18 years old, you barely started college, fuck it, just go for it. You know, just build something, build anything, right? Launch something, build that laundry service, right? Launch it, see what happens, you know, if anyone buys it, right? And so those are kind of the two schools of thought. I don't think either one is better than the other.
Well, Chase, fantastic. And I know that you've already touched a little bit on the YC journey, but this slide is pretty much just to explain any nuances in YC. How, after you get accepted after that retreat, what happens next?
You know, yeah, it is surreal. It's the whole experience happens so quick, and I mean, it's such a big part of your life in such a small period of time, right? After YC, typically you stay in contact with your YC friends that you made at the retreat or at the meetings. Typically you stay in contact with the YC partners. Now I will say the YC partners are pretty hard to get a hold of because that makes sense. They're very busy. I've even like talked to founders that have raised tens of millions of dollars and they're like, yeah, I talk to my partner like twice a year, you know, because they're so busy. But I think the journey after YC looks like building a great company. Not everyone needs to build a startup. I am not here to tell you that you have to build a startup, but building a startup is actually one of the least reliable ways of making money. If you want to make money, you know, go to a coding school, learn to be an engineer. It's consistent. You will find a job. You will make money, right? There's so many ways to make money. You can make a services business. You could do consulting. You could start a roofing company like my brother has. Like, you can do whatever you want to make money, and there's so many easier ways to start a startup than starting a startup to make money. I would say not everyone needs to do it, and not everyone, you know, everyone who goes through YC, not all of them continue with the startup journey. Some of them go and they get jobs, or, you know, become CEO of whatever, or CTO of whatever, or software engineer at X or whatever. Yeah. So the journey just looks different for everybody. For me, what it looked like was, you know, finding a new co-founder. I took my time finding my next co-founder. I was very, very careful, very intentional, and listening to customers. I talked to customers a lot, like probably over 100 decision makers at different enterprises and law firms and healthcare billing companies, and, you know, that Ericsson, and, you know, this company, that company. And
does YC help facilitate some of those introductions and connections?
Yes and no. That's a really interesting point. I did hear a rumor, and this is just a rumor. I mean, I'm on the record, so this is just a rumor that I heard that they used to do a lot more sales work for you back in the day for YC, but now I don't think that's necessarily the case, because, I mean, geez, if you've got so many startup companies going through all these batches and you're doing sales intros for all of them, like you're very quickly going to saturate your network, right? And so I think it's mostly on you, but it does facilitate in the sense that the people that you meet in YC, they typically have pretty good contacts, and they're able to make intros on your behalf, and you're able to make intros on their behalf. And it's just kind of like everyone's trying to figure out how they can help each other, and not in some like I scratch your back, you scratch mine type of way. It's much more, it's just genuine. It's kind of how you would expect a friend to help a friend. Like, you know, most of the interesting business contacts or relationships that I have started out through friends, you know, friends that were in YC, friends that were not in YC. Inception Studio, which is like a different accelerator that I help out with on the side. They've been amazing to us as well. So yeah, I mean, that's been my journey. Just listen to customers and talk to them and build what they want.
And what do you think the most important takeaway you got out of your experience at Y Combinator?
Wow. Okay. I don't even know. Let's see.
Also, I do remember when we talked last, you said that you've met and talked with Sam Altman. How common is that as well? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I've got his phone number. I'll just call him up all the time. You know, it's funny. Like, I think I probably asked him one question one time at like this special YC announcement that they had at OpenAI headquarters. I mean, I asked him a question along with like, must have been 30 or 40 questions that he took, right? So, I mean, you know, he doesn't know my name or anything.
Right.
He obviously was, you know, in YC. He's obviously a YC founder. You could try to contact him. I mean, you could look him up on Bookface and try to contact him. I'm sure you'll get some secretary or something. I'm sure he's got some team of people with like some sort of chief of staff. But yeah, I don't know. Like, Sam's got to be one of the most famous YC founders, but I would say there's a lot of YC founders that are fantastic, that helped me a lot, like a lot, like people I have no business talking to. James Hawkins from Postdog, I chatted with him for 45 minutes where he's like, look, I got 45 minutes to talk to you. Let me just, you know, I know you're trying to make some open source thing. Like, let me just tell you everything about like the most important takeaways from me running Postdog that are relevant to you as a founder. And, you know, I just like took really good notes and used that. And I mean, he's way less famous than Sam Altman, but I would say made a much larger impact in my life, you know.
Right.
And it's not necessarily about like how famous you are. I think it's just about the genuineness. And James is not like a friend of mine. I just reached out to him and emailed him and asked him like, hey, I'm starting this open source thing. I wanted to chat with you about it. And he was gracious enough to give me some of his time.
It's amazing. And I feel like, yeah, definitely one of the best assets in general is that community, being connected with top quality founders. But I do want to open this up to the audience. If you guys have any questions, feel free to start asking. You can also type it in the chat. I know we only have a couple more minutes left, but feel free if you guys want to unmute yourself, please ask some questions.
Yeah, and I think in that note too, Chase, if you know, obviously if people need to hop off right away, what's the best way? Are people to connect with you on LinkedIn or message you in the Slack if they just have any questions or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, reach out over LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, but also, you know, just shoot me an email if you want. Most YC founders that I know are just very willing to help. You could send an email to chase@chatopensource.com. I can't guarantee that I'll respond immediately, but yeah.
Cool. If I share your email in this chat, Chase.
Oh yeah, sure, I can do that. Oh yeah, there's my LinkedIn.
I just shared it.
Yep. There's my email. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the key takeaway, I never really answered the question, did I? I think a great key takeaway from YC was getting into YC is not the point, right? Starting a great business and a great startup and a great company that lasts for a long time is the point, right? If you do that, you can always get into YC, but getting into YC does not equal making, you know, a big company, right? So, you know, I think that was one of my big key takeaways is like, yeah, I'm in YC, but YC is not like I've made it, right? It's not. It is the start of the journey. It's like, okay, I am hopefully I will make it. Now I am starting the journey, you know. And if you make a great company, you can always get into YC. That much is clear. I mean, they're super, super partial to second-time founders, and for good reason, you know.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we appreciate that. I think if we have time for one question, that's just kind of the final note. We've got a question from Daniel. And I think for everyone too, as a founder, right, we receive feedback from investors and customers, right, and other founders. How do you think about when a founder should think about processing feedback, right, and iterating? Obviously, the customer is not always right. You might have 100 meetings or interviews and only 2 tell you to do one feature. How do you typically think about processing feedback as a founder that you could share with other founders?
That's a fantastic question. I think actually I do have something to say about that. The number of people that have promised to give me money is way different than the number of people that have given me money. You know, like people will tell you all the time, like, oh my God, why don't you just build this and do this and we're going to be rich and I'll give you $100,000. Oh my God, it's going to be a huge contract. And, you know, I think it's very important when you're processing that information to keep in mind that, you know, deals fall through. They fall through all the time. It's not enough to have one person say, you know, I will pay for this. You have to have a line. You have to have a wait list. You have to have a wait list of people who are interested. And you have to just be clear. Be clear with the customer. Like, hey, you know you're excited about this. I know you really want me to build this. I cannot build it unless there's a line of customers. So if you could introduce me to your friends and they're also excited about it, then I'll consider building it, right? Like that's kind of the way that I process it, right? Is you know, yeah, you may say you want this, but let's get like 5 or 6 of you who say they want this, and you know, let's get their credit cards and let's ask for $100, right? You know, I'll just charge your credit card now $100 and you can pay me the rest later, and then see what their answer is. It's classic. It's called the mom test. There's a book written about it. The mom test is fantastic. I highly recommend it to anyone who's here.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate it again, Chase. Thank you so much for the time. Tyga, any final thoughts as we close out?
No, again, Chase, we really appreciate it. I got a question to ask you after this because we're going to send you a gift here in the mail in a bit. But other than that, everybody, thank you so much for your time. We're going to be having another wonderful event next month. The CEO of ClassPass and Mind Body, Fritz Landman, is going to be giving a talk like this next month. So super excited. But Chase, thank you so much.